Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has expressed concern over rising tensions between the United States and Venezuela, warning against any possibility of a U.S. ground invasion in South America. Speaking in Belém, in the northern state of Pará, Lula emphasized Brazil's commitment to peace and dialogue in the region. He said, "I don't want this to end up with a U.S. ground invasion of Venezuela. I told President Trump, and I'll repeat it to you, political problems are not solved with weapons. They are solved through dialogue." The remarks were made during a press appearance following regional discussions on security and cooperation in the Amazon basin. Lula's statement comes amid renewed diplomatic friction between Washington and Caracas, following recent U.S. warnings over alleged Venezuelan military activities near the border with Guyana. Regional context: the United States has increased surveillance and diplomatic pressure on Venezuela in recent weeks, citing concerns about cross-border aggression and the deployment of new Venezuelan defense units near disputed territories. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has dismissed these claims, calling them fabrications aimed at justifying external interference. Brazil, which shares borders with both Venezuela and Guyana, has sought to maintain a position of balance. Lula's government has repeatedly stressed non-intervention and regional dialogue as the cornerstone of South America's stability policy. In Portuguese, Lula added, "If there is a lack of dialogue, I have made myself available to help in any way that Brazil can, as we are very interested in helping. We do not wish for, nor do we want, conflict in South America." His statement underscored Brazil's traditional diplomatic approach, prioritizing mediation over confrontation, and reflected Brasilia's broader ambition to serve as a stabilizing actor in regional disputes. Brazil's diplomatic stance since returning to office in January 2023, Lula has positioned Brazil as a voice for moderation in hemispheric affairs. His administration has restored ties with Caracas after a period of strained relations under former President Jair Bolsonaro, who had recognized Venezuela's opposition figure Juan Guaidó as interim leader in 2019. Under Lula, Brazil reopened its embassy in Caracas and re-engaged with the Union of South American Nations and ISR to encourage regional dialogue. Brazilian diplomats have quietly coordinated with both the U.S. and Venezuelan foreign ministries to lower tensions, particularly after Washington hinted at potential multilateral options to address what it called Venezuelan provocations. Officials in Brasilia have repeatedly stated that Brazil would not participate in any form of military coalition or sanction regime targeting Venezuela. The country's foreign policy has remained rooted in the principle of non-intervention, a long-standing feature of Brazilian diplomacy. Broader implications, analysts say Lula's comments reflect concern that a U.S. military move could destabilize the continent's northern region, potentially triggering a humanitarian and refugee crisis that would affect neighboring countries, including Brazil. The state of Roraima on Brazil's northern border already hosts tens of thousands of Venezuelan migrants and asylum seekers who fled economic and political turmoil in recent years. Brazilian defense officials have confirmed that border monitoring remains heightened, but insist the situation is under control. The Brazilian armed forces maintain a neutral posture with no plans for troop mobilization beyond routine surveillance operations. In Washington, U.S. officials have not publicly discussed any plans for military deployment, but have continued to emphasize preparedness in response to regional instability. The Pentagon has described its current presence in the Caribbean and northern South America as purely defensive, aimed at protecting maritime routes and allied territories. Calls for dialogue. President Lula's remarks are consistent with his earlier efforts to promote negotiation as the path to stability. In several international forums, from the United Nations General Assembly to regional summits, Lula has advocated for multilateral mediation mechanisms and criticized unilateral sanctions. Earlier this year, he dispatched envoys to Caracas and Georgetown to mediate over the territorial dispute involving the resource-rich Essequibo region. Though progress has been limited, both Venezuela and Guyana acknowledged Brazil's constructive role in preventing escalation. During his speech in Belém, Lula reiterated that Brazil remains open to facilitating talks between Washington and Caracas. He emphasized that diplomacy must take precedence over coercion. What we must avoid, he said, is the repetition of old mistakes. wars that only deepen the suffering of people and delay the solution of political crises. Historical parallels, observers note that Lula's warning about foreign intervention echoes Brazil's consistent opposition to US military involvement in Latin America. The country voiced similar objections during the Iraq War in 2003 and opposed US support for coups or armed interventions in the hemisphere, including in Haiti and Panama. As a founding member of the South American Defense Council, Brazil has also encouraged collective mechanisms to handle regional disputes independently of external powers. Under Lula's leadership, Brazil is seeking to revive these frameworks, arguing that South America must address its own security issues through cooperation rather than confrontation. Political repercussions domestically. Lula's comments are likely to resonate with a Brazilian public wary of military entanglements. Polls have consistently shown strong support for diplomatic approaches over interventionist policies. Lula's message also aligns with his broader foreign policy narrative, positioning Brazil as a bridge between the global north and south, advocating peace, dialogue, and respect for sovereignty. Internationally, Lula's statement may place additional pressure on Washington to clarify its intentions, while US officials have maintained that all options remain on the table. The Biden administration has thus far prioritized sanctions and diplomatic isolation of Venezuela over direct confrontation. However, reports of troop readiness exercises in neighboring Caribbean territories have fueled speculation about a potential escalation. Venezuela's response in Caracas. Venezuelan authorities welcomed Lula's remarks. The Venezuelan Foreign Ministry issued a statement praising Brazil's principled and independent diplomacy, describing it as a voice of reason in turbulent times. President Maduro, speaking on state television, said his government appreciated Brazil's offer to mediate, adding that peace in South America is a shared responsibility. Opposition groups in Venezuela, meanwhile, expressed skepticism, arguing that Lula's government has been overly sympathetic to Maduro's administration. They called on Brazil to take a firmer stance on human rights issues and democratic reforms before facilitating talks. Regional reactions across the continent. Reactions have been mixed. Argentina and Chile have voiced cautious support for Lula's call for dialogue, emphasizing the need to avoid external interference. Colombia's President Gustavo Petro has also supported diplomatic engagement, calling for a South American peace initiative. In contrast, some Caribbean nations aligned with US policy have stressed the importance of collective action if Venezuela continues military activities in disputed border zones. Guyana, in particular, remains concerned about Venezuelan claims to the Essequibo region, and while it acknowledges Brazil's mediation efforts, it continues to seek security assurances from Washington and the Organization of American States, the international diplomatic landscape. Lula's remarks also come at a time when global attention is divided between crises in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. His statement may be seen as an effort to refocus international attention on South America's fragile equilibrium. Brazil, as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council in 2025, has used its position to advocate de-escalation and dialogue in global conflicts. Diplomatic sources in Brasilia indicate that the Brazilian government is preparing to propose a multilateral contact group that would include representatives from the United States, Venezuela, and key regional actors such as Colombia and Mexico. The initiative aims to create a structured platform for dialogue, avoiding the polarization that has characterized previous mediation attempts. Economic and humanitarian dimensions beyond security concerns. Lula's government is also worried about the economic consequences of any confrontation. Venezuela remains a key trade partner in northern South America, and renewed instability could disrupt cross-border commerce and energy flows. Brazil imports significant quantities of Venezuelan natural gas and has investments in joint infrastructure projects aimed at regional integration. Humanitarian organizations operating along the Brazil-Venezuela border have warned that renewed conflict could trigger another wave of displacement. The Brazilian Ministry of Social Development has already reinforced shelters and logistics facilities in Roraima to accommodate potential arrivals. As tensions simmer, Lula's words serve as both a warning and an appeal. He reiterated Brazil's commitment to regional peace and the avoidance of armed confrontation. His message to both Washington and Caracas was clear: the path forward must be diplomatic. Political problems are not solved with weapons, they are solved through dialogue, Lula said firmly, repeating his core message. For now, the Brazilian government continues to monitor developments closely, maintaining contact with both US and Venezuelan officials. The situation remains fluid, but Brazil's position is unambiguous. No ground invasion, no escalation, and no return to the era of proxy conflicts in Latin America. Brazil's leadership has reaffirmed its role as a mediator in the hemisphere, urging the United States and Venezuela to step back from confrontation and return to dialogue, a stance rooted in the principle that South America's peace must be preserved through diplomacy, not force.